I have concerns, and now Michael has the same concerns.
I have concerns because you are still communicating with Michael.
Your friend is trying to this connection, and you're like, yay! Okay. It's like, I don't get it. I enjoy pretty much violence. Do you like?
I like this movie, or?
Violence.
The moment that changed everything in this situation didn't start with yelling. It didn't start with a fight. It started with a sentence that landed like a warning. Michael tries to break the silence with small talk, the kind people use when they're trapped in an uncomfortable room and don't know how to escape it. He glances toward the television and asks a harmless question about the movie playing. Beran barely looks at him. His expression doesn't soften. His tone doesn't shift. He just responds calmly. He says he isn't interested in movies. He's interested in violence. And suddenly the air in the room feels different. Michael stops talking. You can see him processing what he just heard, trying to decide whether that was sarcasm, intimidation, or something more serious. Because the way Beran says it isn't playful. It isn't joking. It's deliberate. For a moment, no one moved. Laura is still in the kitchen, completely unaware that the atmosphere in her living room has shifted from awkward to threatening. And that single moment changes how this entire meeting feels. Because now, this isn't just an uncomfortable introduction between two men who dislike each other. Now it feels like a confrontation waiting to happen. What makes the situation even more strange is that just a few hours earlier, none of this was supposed to be happening. Michael wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't invited to Turkey. He wasn't expected at the apartment. In fact, Beran didn't even know Michael might show up at all. Yet somehow, the man he distrusts the most is now sitting a few feet away from him. And the question that immediately hangs over the entire situation is simple. Why? Why would someone fly across the world without being invited? From Beran's perspective, the answer is obvious. He believes Michael didn't come to check on Laura. He came to interfere. In Beran's mind, this isn't a friendly visit. It's a challenge. Michael has heard about the relationship problem. He knows there have been arguments. He knows Laura has doubt. And now suddenly he appears in person. That timing feels suspicious. But Michael doesn't see it that way at all. From his point of view, the situation looks very different. He's heard Laura describe arguments. He's heard concerns about gambling. He's heard uncertainty about the future. So when he decided to come to Turkey, he likely believed he was stepping into a situation where Laura might need support. Two men. Two completely different interpretations of the same situation. Beran thinks Michael is trying to steal his girlfriend. Michael thinks he may be protecting someone he cares about. And Laura, whether intentionally or not, has placed herself directly between those two perspectives. That alone is enough to make this meeting volatile. But there's another layer underneath all of it. Because Beran's reaction doesn't feel like simple annoyance. It feels personal. The level of hostility suggests something deeper than jealousy. It suggests that something happened earlier that made Beran completely distrust Michael. Some comment, some conversation, some moment that convinced him Michael's intentions weren't innocent. And that brings up another uncomfortable possibility. What if this rivalry didn't start today? What if this tension has been building for much longer than anyone realized? Michael's sudden arrival might feel dramatic, but the real conflict may have started earlier, when Laura began sharing details about her relationship with someone her boyfriend already saw as a threat. Because when Beran learned that Michael had been hearing about their private problems, that's when suspicion started turning into anger. And now the man he already didn't trust is sitting in his living room, watching him, studying him, trying to understand what kind of person Laura is really dating. Which explains why that strange moment about violence matters so much. It wasn't just an awkward line. It was a message, a quiet signal that this meeting isn't friendly. And if Michael didn't understand that before, he definitely understands it now. But the bigger question is how these two men ended up here in the first place. Because to understand why this meeting became so tense so quickly, you have to go back to the moment Laura made a decision that would quietly ignite this entire conflict. A few hours before that tense moment in the apartment, the atmosphere between Laura and Beran looked completely different. They were walking through the ancient ruins of Ephesus, surrounded by thousands of years of history, marble columns, and tourists taking photos. On the surface, it looked like a thoughtful day that Beran had carefully planned. He had clearly put effort into the outing. Laura loves history, And Ephesus is one of the most famous archaeological sites in the region. Massive stone pathways, towering columns, and ancient buildings that have stood for centuries. It should have been a relaxing day, a chance for the two of them to enjoy each other's company. For a moment, that's exactly what it looked like. Laura even thanked him for organizing the trip, telling him she appreciated how much effort he had put into planning things she enjoys. Beran seemed pleased. The mood between them felt calm, almost affectionate. But underneath that calm surface, Laura had something on her mind. And the moment they sat down to talk, the tone shifted. Laura told Beran she wanted the relationship to work. That part sounded reassuring at first, but then she added something that immediately changed the conversation. She said she had concern, not small concern, real one. She mentioned the issues that had been bothering her, his financial situation, his gambling, the uncertainty that came with it. These weren't topics Brain enjoyed discussing, but what really caught his attention wasn't the concerns themselves. It was what she said next. Laura admitted that she had talked to someone else about these problems, someone she trusted, someone she believed could give her an outside perspective. That someone was Michael. And in that moment, you could almost see Brain's patience disappear. Because for him, this wasn't just about Laura asking for advice. This was about loyalty. Brain had already made it clear how he felt about Michael. He didn't trust him. He believed Michael's interest in Laura wasn't purely friendly. He had asked Laura more than once to distance herself from him. Yet despite all of that, Laura had gone directly to Michael to talk about their relationship. To Beran, that felt like a betrayal. It meant that someone he already saw as a rival now had access to private details about their problems, their arguments, their doubts, their vulnerabilities. And that changes the balance of a relationship very quickly. Because once a third person becomes involved in private conflicts, they don't stay neutral for long. They start forming opinions. They start influencing decisions. From Beran's perspective, that's exactly what was happening. Michael wasn't just a friend anymore. He had become a voice in Laura's ear. Laura, on the other hand, didn't seem to see it that way at all. To her, asking Michael for advice was reasonable. She trusted him. She believed he could offer logical insight. And if she was feeling uncertain about parts of her relationship, it made sense to speak with someone she felt comfortable with. But that explanation didn't calm Beran down. Because the real issue wasn't the advice. The real issue was who she chose to ask. Out of everyone in her life, she went to the one person Beran already believed had feelings for her. And that raises a question that makes the situation even more complicated. Did Laura do that intentionally? Did she involve Michael because she genuinely needed perspective? Or because part of her wanted to see how both men would react? It's a possibility that Beran clearly couldn't ignore. And then, the conversation took an even stranger turn. Laura casually revealed something that made the situation far worse. Michael wasn't just someone she had spoken to recently. He had already made a decision of his own, without asking Laura for permission, without asking if it would cause problems. Michael had booked a flight. He was already on his way to Turkey. And in that moment, the conflict that had been building quietly between three people suddenly became impossible to ignore. Because now, the man Beran distrusted the most wasn't just part of their conversations anymore. He was about to become part of their lives in person. By the time the next morning arrived, the situation had already become uncomfortable. Laura and Beran had gone to bed after a tense conversation the night before, and the issue with Michael was still hanging over everything. Nothing had been resolved. If anything, the uncertainty had only grown stronger. At that point, Michael was still somewhere in the air flying toward Turkey. His arrival felt like something that might happen later. Maybe there would be time to think about it. Maybe Laura would figure out how to handle the situation before the three of them had to face each other. But that illusion didn't last long. Not long after the day started, Laura's phone rang. It was Michael. He had already landed. And the timing of that call instantly changed the entire situation. Michael told her his hotel room wouldn't be ready for a few hours and asked a simple question. Could he come by the apartment for a bit? On the surface, it sounded reasonable. Travelers run into that situation all the time. Early flights, delayed check-ins, waiting for rooms to become available. But this wasn't just a friend passing through town. This was the same man Beran had already warned Laura about. The same man he believed had feelings for her. The same man he believed was trying to insert himself into their relationship. And now, he was asking to come directly to their apartment. Laura paused for a moment, clearly caught off guard by how quickly everything was unfolding. But after a brief hesitation, she agreed. She told Michael he could come over. That decision might have seemed small in the moment, just letting a friend stop by. But the consequences of that choice became obvious almost immediately, because Laura now had to turn around and tell Beran what she had just agreed to. She walked into the room and explained the situation. Michael had landed. He needed somewhere to wait, and he was coming to the apartment very soon. Beran didn't react the way Laura might have hoped. The moment he heard it, his entire posture changed. The calm frustration he had been carrying suddenly shifted into something sharper. Because up until that moment, the situation had still been theoretical. Michael was far away. He was just a topic in conversations. Now, he was 10 minutes away. 10 minutes. That's all the warning Beran had before the man he distrusted the most would be standing at his door. And for the first time since this whole situation began, Beran realized something important. He had no control over what was about to happen. The decision had already been made. Laura had said yes. Michael was already on his way. Whether Beran liked it or not, the meeting was going to happen. What made the moment even more uncomfortable was Laura's reaction to all of this. She admitted she was nervous about how the meeting might go, but there was also something else in her tone. A kind of excitement. Someone had flown across the world because he was worried about her. Someone had taken action when he believed she might need support. And whether she meant to or not, that kind of attention clearly meant something to her. That reaction probably didn't help Beran's mood at all. From his perspective, the situation didn't look romantic or caring. It looked like a direct challenge. A man who wanted his girlfriend had just traveled across the world and was now about to walk into his living room, and Laura was letting it happen. Meanwhile, Michael seemed completely confident in his role in this story. He framed the entire trip as concern. He wanted to see Laura. He wanted to understand what was happening. He wanted to make sure she was okay. But intentions are easy to describe after the fact. What mattered was the reality of the situation. In just a few minutes, 3 people with very different expectations were about to occupy the same room. Brain believed he was defending his relationship. Michael believed he might be helping someone he cared about. And Laura stood right in the center of both of those interpretations, which raises a question that becomes harder to ignore the closer Michael gets to the apartment. Did she ever actually want to stop him from coming? Or did part of her want to see what would happen if both men finally faced each other? Outside the apartment, footsteps approached the door. A knock followed. Laura walked over and opened it. Michael stepped inside, smiling politely as if this were a normal visit between friends. Beran looked at him for a moment. Then he turned his back and walked away. For a few seconds after Michael stepped inside the apartment, nobody seemed sure what to do next. Laura tried to smooth the moment with polite introductions, but the tension was already thick enough to feel. Beran gave Michael a quick greeting that sounded more like an obligation than a welcome. The words were technically polite, but the tone behind them made it clear he wasn't happy about the visit. Then, without much interest in continuing the conversation, Beran turned around and walked back to the couch. He picked up the remote and started watching television as if nothing unusual had just happened. Michael stood there for a moment, clearly unsure whether to sit, speak, or simply wait. The situation already felt uncomfortable, but it became even stranger when Laura stepped away into the kitchen to prepare drinks. Now the 2 men were alone. That silence carried a different weight. Michael tried to handle the moment the way most people would in an awkward social situation. He attempted small talk, something neutral, something harmless. He glanced at the television and asked Beran what he was watching. It should have been the easiest question in the world. Instead, it turned into the moment that shifted the atmosphere completely. Beran answered without turning around. His tone was dry, almost dismissive. He mentioned the movie playing, but there was something in the way he said it that felt pointed, like the answer wasn't meant to invite conversation at all. Michael tried again. He asked if Beran liked classic American films. That was when Beran's response took a darker turn. He said he wasn't interested in American movies. He said he was interested in violence. The line didn't come with a smile. It didn't come with laughter. It came with a stare that lingered just long enough to make the message clear. Michael immediately sensed the shift. His body language changed. His tone softened. He tried to keep the conversation neutral, but it was obvious that the tension had moved into something more serious. Because when someone says something like that in a calm voice, it stops sounding like sarcasm and starts sounding like a warning. At that point, Michael had two choices. He could challenge the comment and risk escalating the situation, or he could ignore it and try to move the conversation somewhere safer. He chose the second option. But the damage had already been done. Beran had made it clear that he wasn't interested in playing the role of polite host. If anything, it seemed like he wanted Michael to feel uncomfortable, maybe even intimidated. From Beran's perspective, this wasn't just a conversation. It was a test, a way of establishing territory. Michael had walked into his space, into his apartment, into his relationship, and Beran wanted to make sure Michael understood exactly where he stood. Michael, however, wasn't as passive as he appeared. While he tried to stay calm during the conversation, the experience clearly affected the way he started viewing Beran. When he later spoke privately, his concerns became much clearer. The hostility he had just witnessed didn't feel like ordinary jealousy. It felt aggressive, unpredictable, and that made him question whether Laura was actually safe in this relationship. At the same time, Michael's thoughts revealed something else as well, something that made the situation even more complicated. Because while he was questioning Beran's behavior, he also started comparing himself to him, not just as a friend, but as a potential partner. Michael admitted that after seeing the way Beran behaved, he couldn't help wondering whether he might actually be more compatible with Laura. And that admission changes the entire meaning of his visit. Because if Michael believes that, then this trip was never just about checking on a friend. It was about something much bigger. It was about whether Laura might eventually choose him instead. And once that possibility enters the situation, the rivalry between these two men stops being subtle. It becomes real. The problem is that neither of them has addressed the most important part of this entire situation, what Laura actually wants. And until that question is answered, the tension between them is only going to grow stronger. When the tension of that meeting starts to settle, something becomes obvious that neither Beran nor Michael seems ready to admit out loud. The conflict between them didn't begin when Michael walked through that door. And it didn't begin when Beran made that threatening comment about violence either. Those were just the visible moments. The real problem had already been developing quietly long before that confrontation ever happened. Because when you step back and look at the situation as a whole, the rivalry between these two men only exists for one reason. Both of them believe they still have a chance with Laura. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this tension. Beran acts like he's defending his relationship, but the intensity of his reaction reveals something deeper. His anger isn't just about Michael showing up, it's about the fear that Michael might actually matter to Laura more than she admits. If Beran truly believed that Michael was just a harmless friend, this situation wouldn't threaten him nearly as much as it does. But he doesn't believe that. He believes Michael is a real competitor. And the reason he believes that is because Laura has never completely closed that door. At the same time, Michael's behavior tells its own story. For years, he had the opportunity to turn his friendship with Laura into something more serious. According to Laura herself, there was a time when she hoped their relationship might become romantic. But Michael never made that move. He stayed in the role of the friend. Until now. And suddenly, the moment Laura becomes involved with someone else, Michael is flying across the world to check on her. He's questioning her relationship. He's comparing himself to Beran. That timing is difficult to ignore. It suggests that Michael didn't fully realize how much Laura meant to him until someone else became part of the picture, which turns the situation into something that feels less like protection and more like competition. Two men who may have very different personalities, very different approaches, but who are now reacting to the same underlying fear, losing her. And right in the center of all of this stands Laura. Because if we're being honest about the situation, neither Beran nor Michael could maintain this rivalry unless Laura's actions left room for it. She continued speaking with Michael even after Beran made it clear he was uncomfortable with that friendship. At the same time, she never fully reassured Beran that Michael was no longer a factor in her life. That creates a strange kind of emotional space. A space where one man believes he still has influence, and the other man believes he might still have a chance. Whether Laura intended it or not, both men ended up interpreting her behavior in ways that kept the competition alive. And that's what made that confrontation in the apartment inevitable. It wasn't really about one conversation or one insult. It was about months, maybe even years of uncertainty finally colliding in one room. Because when Michael walked into that apartment, he wasn't just meeting Laura's boyfriend. He He was meeting the man who had taken the position he never claimed. And when Beran looked at Michael, he wasn't just seeing an old friend. He was seeing someone who might still have the power to change Laura's mind. That's why the tension between them escalated so quickly. Not because of one rude comment, not because of one awkward introduction, but because both men walked into that moment believing the same thing, that Laura's final decision had not been made yet. And once that belief exists, every interaction becomes a test. Every comment becomes a challenge. Every look becomes a signal of who holds the advantage. The real question now isn't whether Beran and Michael will get along. That possibility disappeared the moment Michael arrived. The real question is much simpler. What does Laura actually want? Because until that answer becomes clear, neither man is going to stop fighting for the outcome he hopes for. And the longer that uncertainty continues, the more explosive the situation between them could become.